My mom lied to me for 12 years. Was I wrong for finally snapping? Loss shapes us in ways we can never predict, leaving imprints that last long after the initial pain fades. I was just 6 years old when my father passed away, too young to fully comprehend the permanence of death. My parents had already separated when it happened, and my mother had begun dating the man who would become her new husband. Life has a way of moving forward even when you're not ready for it to do so. In what they claimed was an attempt to give me a proper family unit, my mother and her new husband married shortly after my father's death. The ink had barely dried on their marriage certificate when they sat me down for a conversation that would alter the course of my relationship with them forever. They wanted to change my last name to match theirs. My mother, with what I now recognize as carefully crafted words, explained how important it was for her new husband to care for me without any complications that might arise from having different last names. I can still vividly remember that day. Even at 6, I understood what they were asking me: to give up another piece of my father, another connection to the man I'd lost too soon. Through my sobs I told them I wanted to keep my name, that her husband wasn't my dad, that I couldn't bear to lose anything else of my father's. And that's when they made the promise that would haunt our relationship. They assured me repeatedly and emphatically that this was just temporary. As soon as I turned 17 or 18, they would pay for me to change my name back. It was only to make things easier while I was younger, they said. People would make things difficult for her husband to handle school matters and medical appointments otherwise. They painted it as a simple solution to a temporary problem, a small sacrifice that would be rectified when I was older. I carried that promise with me through my childhood and into my teens, like a secret talisman of hope. Yes, I regretted agreeing to the change, but I held on to their words, counting down the years until I could reclaim my father's name. But promises, as I would learn, are only as good as the people making them. About a year ago, as my high school graduation approached, I brought up the promised name change to my mother. I wanted it done before graduation so my real name, my father's name, would be on my diploma. That's when the excuses began. "There is no rush," she'd say. Her husband, who had stayed mostly quiet about the subject over the years, suddenly had plenty to say. "What's the big deal anyway?" he'd interject, reminding me that I'd had his name longer than I'd had my father's. As if time could somehow erase the meaning behind my original name, as if duration could override connection. The truth finally emerged during one of our increasingly heated discussions. My mother admitted she had no intention of paying for the name change. In her mind, I should keep her husband's name because he'd raised me for so long and done so much. The betrayal cut deep, not just the broken promise, but the casual way they dismissed something that meant everything to me. When I told her this would permanently damage our relationship, "But how dramatic is it really to expect your mother to honor her word? How overdramatic is it to want to carry your father's name?" I spent my remaining time in their house, in a state of cold hostility, building walls around myself that my mother still tries to scale even now. The day after my 18th birthday, now living with my cousin, I filed the paperwork to reclaim my name. My mother's reaction was predictable yet still disappointing. She tried to forbid me as if she still had that power. She even lied about her husband having adopted me, a desperate attempt to prevent me from making my own choice. When that failed, she fell back on emotional manipulation, accusing me of disrespecting them as my parents. That's when I finally snapped. Years of suppressed anger and betrayal erupted as I told her to shut the fuck up. When she started crying, I felt no sympathy. I told her it was good she was crying, that she had lost me over this and it was entirely her fault. I reminded her that had I known she would break her promise, I would never have agreed to the original change. Now, with my court date approaching, some family members are criticizing how I spoke to my mother. They say I was too harsh, too disrespectful. But where was their concern for respect when my mother and stepfather were breaking their promises to a grieving child? Where was their outrage when they manipulated a 6-year-old into giving up his father's name with false promises? Some people might think I'm being unnecessarily cruel, that a name is just a name. But this isn't just about a surname, it's about trust, respect, and honoring the memory of a father who was taken from me too soon. It's about a child's right to maintain a connection to their past, and about adults being held accountable for their promises. A name carries history, identity, and belonging. My father's name is my inheritance, my connection to him, and my right to reclaim. No amount of tears, manipulation, or family pressure will change that. Sometimes being true to yourself means standing firm, even when others call you harsh for doing so. Sometimes the most respectful thing you can do for yourself is to be disrespectful to those who have disrespected you first. So now I ask you, am I wrong for finally standing up for myself, for demanding the return of something that should never have been taken from me in the first place, for refusing to let my mother's tears manipulate me any longer? Your parents are supposed to protect your interests, not exploit your vulnerability. They're supposed to keep their promises, not dismiss them when they become inconvenient. The path to reclaiming your identity sometimes requires burning bridges you never wanted to cross in the first place. As my court date approaches, I feel a mixture of anticipation and vindication. Soon I'll have my father's name back, not because they helped me as promised, but because I fought for it myself. And maybe that's the most fitting way to honor my father's memory after all.